The gospel lesson this morning is found in Matthew as well as in Luke. Jesus is speaking specifically to his disciples in this passage. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life? If then you are not able to do so small a thing as that, why do you worry about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all of his glory was not clothed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today, and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith?
We know that Jesus would never, ever say to someone standing in front of him who was hungry and in need of clothing and shelter, don't worry about that. God will take care of you. He is speaking specifically in this little lesson to his disciples, to people who were choosing to follow him and bring the kingdom. He's speaking to them about things that really were very basic needs, very basic worries and concerns in their time. But he's saying to them, if you're following me, then don't put your attention any longer on your own needs. From now on, it's about the kingdom of God, that message, that good news of God's love. And if you do that, if you deliver that message, you don't have to worry about these things. They will come. Well, Francesco Bernardoni took this message very, very seriously in his life. The man that the Roman Catholic Church and the Church of England now celebrate as St. Francis of Assisi became poor on purpose, giving up the food and the clothing that seemed so basic in life. He was the spoiled son of a very wealthy merchant in Italy, and he really liked nothing more as a young man than to party and play with his friends. Eventually, he wanted to have some kind of honors as a warrior or a knight or a prince. The kind of self-indulgence that he participated in was not so different in the 13th century than it is now. Francesco was charming. Francis, as we call him, had a poet's heart, and he was very, very musical, and he loved to write song and poetry and entertain people, and people simply adored him. They gravitated to him. They wanted to take care of him and be around him. He was joyful, and he loved beautiful things. He totally lived the good life, the high life, we might say. Well, a spate of illness took him and slowed him down a little bit, and then he had a couple of experiences that totally transformed his life. He had one experience of seeing a leper, someone who he considered to be thoroughly grotesque and abhorrent, someone he would never go near. And there was a moment in which, in passing this man on the road, he felt the urge to approach him and to give him the kiss of peace. And in this man, he saw the beauty of God's world, and he realized there was beauty in every single thing and every part of creation. It changed his life to see beauty in where he used to see something so horrible. He also had the experience of speaking with Jesus in the form of a talking crucifix. This sounds strange to our ears, of course, but this crucifix was in the rubble of a very old church outside of Assisi. And in those moments, his life was changed forever. Now, Jesus Christ told him through this crucifix that it was time for him to rebuild the church. It was in ruins. And Francis initially believed he was talking about the rubble of the church he was standing in. And so his first efforts to follow Jesus Christ was to literally find stones and rebuild that church. It was only over time that Francis and all who followed him began to understand that this message was a message to rebuild the church, to bring it more in keeping with the deepest truths of the gospel message. Well, Francis disowned his father and his family, and he literally stepped out of the fine clothing he was wearing so that he was completely naked at one of the key moments in his life when he made a complete commitment to live in utter poverty. People thought he was crazy. We would too, right? I mean, this was completely nuts. And yet what happened over a period of time is that they began to be attracted to him again. Here was this same joyful spirit. Here was this same person who loved beauty, but he was seeing it everywhere in everything and everyone. Here was this grateful soul if you shared a meal or a bit of food with him. Here was someone who was preaching the gospel of God's love in a way that seemed fresh and very, very real. Well, eventually, Francis had 11 followers, and it's at that moment that he decided, and this was kind of impulsive if you really think about it, that he should go see the Pope, who didn't have a clue who he was. But he didn't want to be understood as a heretic and get in trouble, and he didn't want these few people who were following him to be accused of heresy and get in trouble, so he thought, I better declare myself to the Pope, who immediately turned out this dirty guy. But the Pope had a dream about Francis and called him back after that dream and said, I give you permission to preach the word. I give you permission to establish an order. This he did in the year 1210, if you like those kinds of references. He was never a priest. He was just a friar, just a brother who established an order that within 10 years' time had 5,000 people in it. Think about that. That's amazing, isn't it? And eventually it traveled to many, many countries besides Italy. And he established for women the order of Poor Clares, so that they also could live together in this state of poverty and joy. And he established what was always known as the third order, for people who had families and lives where they couldn't leave and live a cloistered life, but they could still take these vows and do their best to live that way. Pretty amazing. The bigger the order grew, the more he stepped back from that leadership role of organizing all of this, and the more he became again that simple preacher and man of prayer. His health was failing him, and he was nearly blind due to the incredibly poor diet and living conditions he had chosen for himself. And he died when he was just 45 years old. He died with the mark of the stigmata on his body. If you don't know what that is, his is the first recorded case of this in Christian history. The stigmata are the marks, the bleeding marks in the hands, feet, and side of a person who has such an affinity for Jesus Christ, so participates so fully in the suffering, death, and life of Jesus Christ that these marks appear on their body. We don't have lots of explanations for this, but this is recorded and accounted for in the life of Francis. So in all of this, even unto his death, this is what he maintained. He said, if I have things, I need to protect and defend them. And that means that I need weapons and laws. Doesn't this sound appropriate? But you can do nothing, he said, to a man who has nothing. You can't steal from me. You can't starve me. You can't ruin my reputation. I have none of these things. I am free. Do you hear that? By absolutely relinquishing all the things that we say material are valuable, he is free. So if you joined the order of Francis, you made that vow of poverty. You brought nothing with you, you took nothing with you out into the world when you worked for what you needed, and you preached the gospel, and you never, never, never used money for anything. You shared that gospel joyfully and freely, and whenever you could, you gave away all that you could. In a nutshell, you did not worry about yourself. You saw yourself as absolutely one with this incredible creation, not just your fellow human beings, but the animals and the earth as well. Francis was known to preach to birds. Traditions say that he would call the birds together and he would preach to them, and they would sit and listen until he excused them to go on their way again. There's another story where he had a deep time of community with a wolf that was terrorizing a little village. And he spoke with the wolf, and the wolf stopped terrorizing the village, and then he spoke with the dogs so they would stop terrorizing the wolf. And the story goes that everyone lived very happily, thanks to Francis. He wrote songs and poems about the heavens and the earth, about brother sun and sister moon. Did you hear that in our offering doxology today? We get those words from St. Francis. Our choir and the earlier song are some of the songs and some of the, not the melodies, but the words that he wrote and the prayers he wrote about selfless gratitude for the world and how one might participate in it selflessly. He said that nature is God's mirror. That is a beautiful idea. He would say all one needs to do at peace with the world is be at peace with God. And all one needs to be at peace with God is to be at peace with the world. Didn't matter which end you started with. This would be how peace comes into a person's life. And once you recognize that peace, once you join in that peace, you are participating in oneness with all of creation. The other night on the Colbert Report, former President Bill Clinton said an interesting thing. He said this: "There's no difference between being selfish and selfless." Of course, Stephen Colbert gives him a look like, "What?" And he repeats it again. He said, "There is no difference between being selfish and selfless if you understand how deeply connected we truly are." Okay, Bill Clinton could have been channeling St. Francis in those moments. If you understand how deeply connected you are to the whole of this existence, then when you are taking care of another, you are truly also taking care of yourself. No wonder there is joy in that kind of giving. We know this deep connectedness. We know the truth of this in so many ways. If I start to step off of this platform and I stumble, you'll all go, "Oh!" right? Because we are connected. We are so tied in that way. Just this week, how our hearts broke watching what happened in Texas in the aftermath of that fertilizer explosion, and how much we cared about those volunteer firefighters and others who put themselves in harm's way to be sure that everyone was protected, especially those folks in the nursing home nearby there. We saw on Monday how people ran into the midst of danger after those bombs went off in Boston to be sure that there was help, immediate help, and kindness available to people who had been so seriously injured. We saw how some marathon runners ran an extra few miles to get to the hospitals because they had heard that blood was desperately needed. We grieved in our homes. We try still to figure out what we could do because we feel that connection. We've cried. We've been angry. We've been worried. We feel it because we are actually one with these suffering people. So, what about those two young men who caused all the terror and destruction this past week? Are we one with them? Well, frankly, it's too easy and it's too hard to simply say yes. The bigger truth is that they certainly do not feel connected to all of us and to those that they harmed, let alone do they feel any connection to the greater good or the whole of God's creation. There seems to be only one desire, no motivation to connect or to deepen understanding. The desire was, in fact, to bring terror and destruction. They didn't know in doing this that they weren't trying just to harm us, but that they were harming themselves as well. And they were harming the whole of God's creation. So are we one with them? With those who choose, wherever they are, to destroy? Well, all I can say is that is the goal. That is the goal. If we can get to a place where we actually can experience a oneness with people who are bent on destruction, then the destruction ends. We know that's true. It may sound kind of simplistic. It may sound like Pollyanna. It may sound like pie in the sky or some attempt to be comforting. But in truth, if you're really listening to me, I'm saying a very hard thing this morning. Jesus commands those who follows him not to worry about themselves. For us, it's not what we're going to eat or wear. It's what's going to happen in this terrifying world around us. And we are commanded not to worry about ourselves. This is the high road. This is the road that Jesus journeyed in his life. He gave his all, and he did not worry about himself. On this Green Sunday, this Earth Day time that we are celebrating at Hillview, we're trying to do just a few small but genuine gestures to commit ourselves to caring a little more deeply and walking a little softer on this precious, fragile planet. We're choosing the high road, even if it's just for a few moments or a few moments at a time, for the whole of creation, for the greater good. Our choices matter. Putting the greater good first matters so much, and we can start in such little ways that are right in front of our noses. One of my friends this past week was so depressed over all of these events that her husband finally said to her, "Why don't you just go outside and do some nice stuff for no particular reason?" And she wrote on Facebook that she did this, that she felt so much better. I had a hard week in my own for these reasons and for other reasons. And when I read that, I thought, yes, what a good idea. And when I went to the grocery store, I bought my groceries, and I helped the person in the car next to me just put her groceries in the car. And then I drove through Dutch Brothers for no particular reason and gave them the money to pay for the next driver who came through without buying a drink for myself. Now, this is not a particularly important thing, but I have to tell you that young person who worked there found that so wonderful and fun. And you know the person who got the free drink felt great, and any money left over was a tip. Well, those are things I did, but I called her and I said, "What did you do? What did you do that made you feel better?" And she'd done a few different kinds of things, but one of them was give away a bicycle, 2 people in the family, 3 bikes, beautiful bike that they just didn't need. She went out with the bike and she found somebody who could truly use it. Said it felt fantastic. She said, "I was so excited just trying to think of things to do." She went to the grocery store and she bought a gift card from the clerk she knows best. And then she said to the clerk, "Now keep this card here. And when you see somebody that you know is low on money, whether it's food stamps or they're just barely cutting it, you know your customers, you pull this out and you use this whenever you want." She did things like that, and she said, "I have to tell you, not only did I stop worrying about the world, I felt," here it is, "joyful." I have to tell you, I love this. It's what St. Francis was doing in his life in his own rather peculiar, very particular way. We are called to do this in our own rather peculiar, very particular ways. He stopped worrying about himself. He put others first, and joy came. This is work we can do. Amen.